The morning had started like every other one, with the elevator ride stretching just long enough for doubt to creep in. The mirrored walls reflected a woman who looked calm, composed, professional, tailored blazer, hair pulled back neatly, posture straight, but beneath that still surface, her pulse beat louder with every passing floor. She held her tablet close to her chest, fingers pressing into its smooth edge as if grounding herself. Today mattered. Not in the dramatic, world-ending way people like to exaggerate, but in the quiet, dangerous way careers could tilt or collapse without warning. When the doors opened, the office greeted her with its usual sterile brightness. Glass walls, steel accents, the low hum of conversations already underway. People moved with purpose, coffee cups in hand, voices confident. She walked past them, offering polite nods that were rarely returned, and headed toward the conference room at the end of the hall. Her name was already displayed on the digital schedule outside the door, listed beneath the title of the presentation she had built from the ground up. She paused for half a second, inhaled, then stepped inside. The room was cold in that deliberate way corporate spaces often were, as if discomfort sharpened thinking. A long glass table stretched through the center, surrounded by sleek chairs already occupied by people who barely looked up as she entered. At the far end, the screen glowed with the opening slide of her presentation. She took her seat, placing her tablet down carefully, aligning it with the notebook and pen she had brought more out of habit than necessity. She had rehearsed this. Not once or twice, but dozens of times. She knew the numbers, the projections, the risks. She knew where every question might come from and how to answer it. The data was solid. The strategy was sound. She had earned her place here. As the meeting began, voices filled the room, confident, assertive, overlapping at times. She waited her turn, listening, observing. When her moment came, she stood and walked to the screen, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest that always accompanied speaking in rooms like this. Not fear exactly, but awareness. Awareness of eyes that judge before listening. She began anyway. Her voice was steady as she walked them through the projections, explaining the adjustments she had made, the assumptions she had challenged. She pointed out inefficiencies others had overlooked, risks that had been quietly ignored for years. As she spoke, she saw a few heads nod. That gave her a flicker of reassurance. Then it happened. A soft chuckle from somewhere to her left. She ignored it and continued. Halfway through her explanation, a hand lifted, not to ask, but to interrupt. She stopped mid-sentence. "Hold on," her supervisor said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossing casually. "Can you go back to that slide?" She did, tapping the screen. He squinted, lips pursed. "These numbers don't seem right." Her stomach tightened, but she kept her tone calm. "They're correct. I recalibrated the model to account for." He waved a hand dismissively. "We've been using the same model for years. It's reliable." "Yes," she replied. "And that's exactly why the losses have been consistent." A few eyebrows rose. A few smirks appeared. Someone murmured, "Bold." Her supervisor's smile thinned. "I'm just saying, this is a big shift. Maybe too big." She felt the shift in the room then, subtle but unmistakable. Curiosity giving way to skepticism. Support thinning into silence. "I ran the numbers multiple times," she said. "If you'd like, I can walk you through." "I think we should have someone else review this," another voice cut in. "Just to be safe." She turned toward the sound. A colleague who had joined the company after her, who had never once stayed late to refine a report, who had glanced at her work for maybe 10 seconds. "Someone else?" she asked evenly. "You know," he said, shrugging. "A second opinion." The room hummed with quiet agreement. Her supervisor nodded. "Right. No offense. It's just, this is high stakes." No offense. She felt heat rise in her chest, but she swallowed it down. "That's why I took extra care." Another laugh, louder this time. "You're taking this personally," someone said. "We're just being cautious." She looked around the table, searching for a single face that reflected fairness. Most avoided her gaze. A few watched her like this was entertainment. She returned to her seat slowly, the screen still glowing with her name behind her. The meeting continued, but now the conversation moved around her work as if she wasn't there, dissecting it, questioning it, reframing it without her input. Each comment felt like a small cut, precise and deliberate. Her supervisor leaned forward. "Next time, maybe run this by me first." "I did," she replied quietly. "Twice." He blinked, then smiled thinly. "Let's not argue." Something inside her cracked then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that she felt it. The familiar realization that no matter how prepared she was, no matter how right she was, the room had already decided who she was allowed to be. She sat there, hands folded, listening as her work was stripped of its authority. She thought of the late nights, the missed dinners, the careful calculations done while the city slept. None of that seemed to matter now. Her supervisor cleared his throat. "I think we'll pause this discussion." "Pause. We'll revisit after a more thorough review." She nodded, because that was what professionalism demanded. Because reacting would only confirm whatever story they had already written about her. As people began to gather their things, she remained seated, staring at the reflection of herself in the glass table. For a moment, she wondered if this was it. If this was the moment her career quietly stalled, not with a firing or a confrontation, but with a polite dismissal dressed up as caution. Then the door handle turned. At first, no one noticed. Conversations continued, chairs scraped against the floor. But the door opened slowly, deliberately, and a figure stepped inside. Security. The room went still. Security didn't speak at first. They stood just inside the doorway, hands clasped in front of them, eyes scanning the room like they were trying to decide who the problem was supposed to be. The sudden presence alone was enough to shift the energy. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs stopped moving. Even the low hum of the air conditioner seemed louder now. Her supervisor straightened in his chair. "Is there an issue?" he asked, irritation creeping into his voice, as if his authority had been challenged by the interruption itself. One of the guards glanced down at a tablet. "We received a call." "A call?" The supervisor laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "About what, exactly?" The guard's eyes flicked toward her. Just for a moment. That was all it took. She felt every gaze in the room slide back onto her, heavier now, sharpened by assumption. The air pressed against her chest. She hadn't called anyone. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't done anything except present her work. "I don't know who called you," the supervisor continued, waving a hand toward her without even looking. "But we're in the middle of a meeting. If someone here is feeling overwhelmed, we can handle it internally." Overwhelmed. Her jaw tightened. She stood slowly, careful not to move too fast, aware of how even a small gesture could be twisted. "No one called security," she said evenly. "And I'm not overwhelmed." A few people exchanged looks. One woman near the end of the table crossed her arms, lips pursed, eyes flicking over her like she was assessing a threat. "Well," another voice chimed in, light but cutting. "Something clearly disrupted the meeting." She looked toward the speaker. "My presentation?" "No," he said quickly. "Your reaction." Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. "I haven't reacted." Her supervisor sighed dramatically, standing now. "Let's all calm down. This doesn't need to become a situation." A situation. As if it already wasn't. He turned to security. "There's no danger here. Just a disagreement that got emotional." Emotional. The word landed harder than any raised voice. She felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, but she forced it down. Crying would be fatal here. Anger even more so. "I did my job," she said, louder now, though still controlled. "I presented accurate data. That's not emotional." The supervisor smiled, thin and patronizing. "No one said it wasn't. But tone matters." Tone. Someone snorted softly. Another shook their head as if disappointed. The guard cleared his throat. We were told there was a disturbance. Her supervisor nodded immediately. Yes. There was. And we're handling it. He turned back to her, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. Why don't you take a break? Step outside. We'll continue and loop you in later. Step outside. She stared at him, incredulous. You want me removed from a meeting about my own work? Removed is such a strong word, he replied. Let's call it giving everyone space. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. She could feel the eyes on her again, waiting. Judging. Some of them looked almost relieved, like this outcome confirmed something they'd already believed. I'm not leaving, she said. The room stiffened. Her supervisor's expression hardened. This isn't a request. There it was. The line she knew too well. Compliance dressed as professionalism. You're making this harder than it needs to be, someone muttered. Exactly, another added. Why be difficult? Difficult. Disruptive. Emotional. Words that followed her no matter how carefully she spoke. Security shifted their weight, clearly uncomfortable. One of them looked at her with something like sympathy, then quickly away. Her supervisor took a step closer. We can escort you out, or you can walk out on your own. Your choice. A ripple of quiet approval moved through the room. No one spoke up. No one questioned the fairness of it. They simply watched, as if this were inevitable. Her chest tightened painfully. This job wasn't just a paycheck. It was stability. It was proof, to herself, to everyone who had ever doubted her, that she belonged in rooms like this. Walking out now, under these circumstances, would follow her. People would whisper. Records would reflect. Unprofessional conduct. Doors would quietly close. She took a breath. Then another. I'm not leaving, she repeated, voice steady but trembling at the edges. I haven't done anything wrong. The supervisor's patience snapped. Enough. He turned to security. Please escort her out. The word her echoed, sharp and isolating. One of the guards stepped forward hesitantly. Ma'am, if you could. She raised a hand gently. I understand, she said, not to him, but to herself. I just want it noted that I'm being removed without cause. Her supervisor scoffed. There's plenty of cause. Oh? She asked quietly. Name one. Silence. For a moment, no one answered. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then the supervisor leaned in, voice low and dangerous. Because you don't know when to stay in your place. The words were barely above a whisper, but they sliced cleanly. She felt them settle deep, heavy with meaning, with history. Her throat closed. A few people looked uncomfortable now. One woman glanced down at the table. Another shifted in his seat. But still, no one spoke. Security hesitated. That was when the sound came from the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Not rushed. Not uncertain. The glass walls of the conference room reflected a tall figure approaching, framed by the sharp lines of the office corridor. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Then the door opened fully. A man stepped inside, impeccably dressed, calm in a way that commanded attention without effort. His eyes swept the room once, taking in the frozen faces, the guards, the tension crackling like static. Then his gaze landed on her. For the first time since the meeting began, the weight lifted from her chest, just slightly. He didn't speak right away. Her supervisor turned, annoyance flashing across his face. Sir, this is a private meeting. The man smiled faintly. I know. He stepped forward, resting a hand on the back of the chair beside her, grounding, protective, unmistakably intentional. The room seemed to shrink around him. I'm here to observe, he continued calmly. And I've seen enough. Every person at the table stiffened. No one laughed now. No one whispered. And for the first time, the balance of power began to tilt, slowly, dangerously, away from the people who thought they were untouchable. The room felt different the moment he spoke, as if the air itself had shifted. Not colder, not warmer, heavier. Every eye tracked him now, drawn by something they couldn't quite place but instinctively respected. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority clung to him naturally, the kind that didn't beg for attention but took it anyway. Her supervisor straightened, forcing a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, but you can't just walk into an executive meeting." The man glanced at him briefly, then looked back at her. His expression softened, concern flickering there before being carefully masked. "Are you all right?" he asked. The question alone nearly undid her. Not are you causing trouble, not what happened here, not why are you upset, just that. Are you all right? She nodded once, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "I will be," she said. Something in her voice made a few people shift uncomfortably. The man's gaze returned to the room, calm but piercing. "Good," he said. "Because what I just walked into was unacceptable." Her supervisor laughed nervously. "I think you're misunderstanding the situation. There was a disagreement," tempers flared. "No," the man interrupted, still composed. "There was a display of arrogance, bias, and incompetence." Silence slammed down like a dropped weight. One of the executives cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, who exactly are you?" The man smiled faintly. "That's a fair question." He took a few steps forward, slow and deliberate, positioning himself fully between her and the table. The subtlety of the move wasn't lost on anyone. It was protective without being dramatic. "My name is on the building," he said simply. A few people frowned, confused. "It's also on your paychecks," he added. Recognition spread across faces like a sudden illness. Eyes widened. Color drained. Someone's mouth fell open. Her supervisor's smile vanished completely. The man continued, voice still even. "I've been watching this department for months. Reviewing reports. Observing meetings. Listening." A pause. "What I saw today confirms every concern I've had." Her supervisor stammered. "Sir, if there's been some misunderstanding." "There hasn't," the man said calmly. "I heard the dismissive comments. I watched you interrupt her. I watched you question her competence without questioning your own." He turned slightly toward the screen still glowing behind her, her data frozen in place. "I also reviewed her projections last night." That landed hard. "They're accurate," he said. "More than accurate. They identify flaws in your existing strategy that have been costing this company millions." A sharp inhale rippled through the room. The man's eyes moved from face to face. "And instead of engaging with that information, you chose to belittle the person who delivered it." Her supervisor tried again, desperation creeping into his tone. "We were just being cautious. That's our responsibility." "Caution," the man replied. "Doesn't look like mockery." He gestured toward her. "You questioned her tone. Her attitude. Her place." The word place echoed, heavy with implication. "I heard it," the man said quietly. "Every syllable." The supervisor's face flushed. "Sir, I didn't mean." "What you meant," the man cut in, "is less important than what you did." He turned back to her then, addressing her directly. "Do you know why I asked you to join this company?" She blinked, surprised. "Because of my work," she said carefully. "Yes," he nodded. "And because you don't waste time trying to sound powerful. You focus on being right." A few people swallowed hard. "You didn't raise your voice today," he continued. "You didn't insult anyone. You didn't become what they expected you to become." His gaze sharpened as it moved back to the table. "And that's what made them uncomfortable." No one spoke. The man folded his hands loosely. "Let me be very clear. Disagreement is healthy. Accountability is necessary. But humiliation is not a leadership tool." He turned to security. "You were called because someone here felt threatened." The guard nodded. "Yes, sir." "Threatened by data," the man said. "By competence. By someone they underestimated." The guard glanced uneasily at the table. Her supervisor tried one last time, voice tight. Sir, we've given years to this company. The man nodded once. And today showed me exactly what you've given it. He took a breath, not a dramatic one, just enough to signal a decision had been made long before this moment. Effective immediately, he said. This management team is relieved of their duties. The words fell into the room like glass shattering. Someone stood abruptly. You can't fire all of us. I can't, the man replied calmly. And I am. Another voice broke, panicked. This is outrageous. No, he said, finally allowing a hint of steel into his tone. What's outrageous is how normalized this behavior became under your watch. He turned to her again. I'm sorry you had to experience this. She shook her head slowly. I've experienced worse. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. That doesn't make it acceptable. Security received a quiet instruction. Movement followed. Chairs scraped. Voices rose in protest, then fell into stunned silence as people were escorted toward the door. She watched it all unfold, heart pounding, emotions colliding, vindication, disbelief, exhaustion. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply stood there, grounded now, unmovable. As the room emptied, the man leaned slightly closer. I should have stepped in sooner. She looked up at him. You stepped in when it mattered. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. The next phase of this company will need leaders who don't confuse power with cruelty. Her eyes flicked to the screen behind her. Then we'll need to rebuild. A small smile touched his lips. Exactly. Outside the glass walls, word was already spreading. People stopped walking. Heads turned. Whispers began. Inside the room, only the two of them remained. And for the first time that day, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not fear, not anger, but anticipation. Whatever came next would change everything. The aftermath didn't explode the way people imagined it would. There was no shouting in the halls, no dramatic chase of executives carrying boxes. What spread instead was quieter, more unsettling, shock layered with realization. Employees gathered in clusters outside glass offices, whispering as security escorted familiar faces past them. The same people who had once commanded rooms now avoided eye contact, their confidence leaking away with every step toward the elevators. She stood by the conference table, hands resting lightly on the cool glass, watching the last of them leave. The room felt larger now, stripped of its tension, emptied of the weight that had pressed on her chest all morning. The screen behind her still displayed the final slide of her presentation, the one no one had allowed her to finish explaining. She reached out and turned it off. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was earned. He remained beside her, not crowding, not hovering, present without taking space. Human resources will handle the logistics, he said quietly. Access cards, accounts, announcements. I'll address the company before the end of the day. She nodded. They'll be angry. They'll be honest, he replied. For the first time in a while. A faint smile tugged at her mouth. Honesty has a way of scaring people who've relied on intimidation. That's exactly why it matters. They walked out together, not side by side like a spectacle, but with an easy familiarity that made some people stop mid-step. Conversations cut off. Screens went idle. A few employees straightened unconsciously, as if the atmosphere itself demanded a better version of them. In the open workspace, she felt eyes on her, curious now, not dismissive. Some were apologetic, others uncertain. A young analyst caught her gaze and quickly looked away, cheeks flushing. She didn't resent them. Fear had taught many people how to survive by staying quiet. Today had taught them something else. He stopped near the center of the floor and turned to her. I want you to finish your presentation, he said. This afternoon? She hesitated. To whom? To everyone, he said. No interruptions. No commentary. Just the work. Her breath caught, not with anxiety this time, but with something steadier. Okay. When he stepped away to make arrangements, she found a quiet corner near the windows. The city stretched out below, relentless and alive. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the building settle around her. Her hands were still trembling, the adrenaline refusing to fade. She breathed through it, grounding herself in the weight of the floor beneath her shoes, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. She wasn't angry anymore. She was clear. By mid-afternoon, the entire company had gathered, some standing, some seated wherever they could find space. There was a nervous energy in the air, a shared understanding that something fundamental had shifted. He stood briefly at the front, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. "Today," he said, "we correct a mistake." He didn't elaborate. He didn't justify. He stepped aside and gestured toward her. She walked forward, feeling the room hold its breath. When she reached the podium, she paused, not to steady herself, but to look at the people in front of her. People who had doubted her. People who had watched her be undermined. People who were now waiting. She began. This time, no one interrupted. No one smirked. Questions were saved for the end, asked thoughtfully, respectfully. She explained the model in full, highlighting the risks and opportunities with clarity that left little room for argument. Heads nodded, not out of obligation, but understanding. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment longer than expected. Then someone clapped. Others followed, not thunderous, not performative, but sincere. The sound filled the space, warm and grounding. She stepped back, heart full in a way she hadn't anticipated. Later, as people filtered out, several approached her, some awkward, some earnest. Apologies were offered, softly and without excuse. She accepted them without ceremony. Forgiveness didn't require spectacle either. As the building returned to its rhythm, she found him again near his office. He watched the floor thoughtfully, hands clasped behind his back. "You changed the tone," he said when he noticed her. "Not just today. For what comes after." She shook her head. The tone was already there. It just needed permission to surface. He smiled. "That's leadership." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. "I want you to take over the department," he said finally. She didn't answer immediately. She considered the weight of it, the responsibility, the scrutiny, the expectations. She thought of the room that had tried to erase her voice and the people who would now look to her for direction. "Yes," she said. "On one condition." He raised an eyebrow, amused. "Name it." "We build something better than what we replaced," she said. "Not just profitable. Humane." His smile widened, proud and unmistakable. "That was always the goal." The sun dipped low by the time she gathered her things to leave. As she walked toward the elevator, she passed the conference room once more. The chairs were neatly arranged again, the glass table polished to a reflective shine. It looked the same as it had that morning. She didn't. Outside, the city greeted her with evening light and movement. She stepped onto the sidewalk, shoulders lighter, steps sure. The day had taken something from her, illusions perhaps, but it had given her something far more lasting in return. She had not been saved. She had been seen. And the people who mistook cruelty for power had learned, too late, that respect is not granted by titles, but by the way you treat those who stand before you. As she walked away, the building behind her glowed softly against the darkening sky, a quiet testament to the truth that no amount of authority can survive exposure, especially when justice finally walks through the door.